Welcome back to our study. Check out our NA Tradition study group on Facebook. I will post the link below the questions in the description box. This is Tradition 9 for In Service from our Guiding Principles book, In Service. Tradition 9 speaks directly about our service bodies, and this tradition is vital to understanding how we serve in Narcotics Anonymous. Traditions 7, 8, and 9 together remind us who we are and what we are, a fellowship of addicts seeking recovery. We are not a school, a business, a treatment center, or a governmental agency. NA is non-professional, as indicated by Tradition 8, and ought never be organized. But that doesn't mean we're thoughtless and disorganized. We create service bodies that do business on our behalf, but they are always a part of Narcotics Anonymous. They are responsible to those they serve, and that responsibility ought always determine what we do and how we do it. Being directly responsible may sometimes seem inefficient or inconvenient, but some things are more important than efficiency. As addicts, most of us are familiar with living in a perpetual state of emergency, and it can be too easy to operate this way in service. The sense of desperate urgency, we have to do it right now, we have to fix it right now, or we need to raise funds right now, is a sign that we are running on fear rather than hope. Our perception of our circumstances doesn't just determine how we feel, it changes how we respond to the world around us. When we are compelled by fear and desperation, we are not likely to make our best decisions. The relationship between our groups and NA services is much more than a two-way street. It's an elaborate web. Autonomous groups have relationships with each other, service boards and committees have relationships with the groups, and boards and committees are in relationship and communication with each other. The web is made up of many strands and connections, and making sure those threads remain strong begins when we ensure that there is a free flow of information, support, and goodwill. When we are deep in a service project, we may develop a close working relationship with others on the project. H&I can sometimes feel like its own tribe, for example, or a convention committee may come together like a family. When we get through all the difficulty of developing a working committee, when consensus develops and the way forward seems clear, it can feel inconvenient or even wrong to have to consult those outside the little group. Service bodies can feel separate from those they serve, but responsibility doesn't work without communication. And sometimes we have to explain our decisions and accept input. We may even be redirected in ways that are hard for the committee to accept. Direct responsibility to those we serve means that those we serve have a voice in what we do, wherever or however we serve. Constructive criticism sometimes feels like just plain criticism, but if we set aside our feelings and listen closely, the input may improve our service efforts. Finding the balance between ensuring that our service boards are responsible and allowing a minority of onlookers to micromanage or bully our trusted servants can be harder than it sounds. Small number of people or groups may have very strong feelings about an issue that has already been settled. Resolving these differences without bitterness is challenging and requires that we listen carefully to each other. Small changes can often resolve big issues if we can listen for the principles behind a problem. Direct responsibility thrives on mutual respect and unity. Even when we have very different ideas of how to get there, we are working together toward the same primary purpose. Our commitment to unity and goodwill keeps us involved even when we don't agree. Service efforts are enriched by active involvement. When it's not just the same few people doing most of the work, when there's rotation of trusted servants and new people are getting involved, service is dynamic and exciting. Otherwise, service bodies can start to feel closed. New people feel like they're interrupting or unwelcome. We resist new ideas or new ways of doing things. Complacency can kill an NA community in much the same way it can kill an addict. The spark goes out of our recovery, and gradually we forget it was ever there. While those we serve in this tradition ultimately refers to the NA groups, we may want to consider some other layers of responsibility we experience in NA service, and be mindful of what it means to be directly responsible to and through our levels of service. A hospitality committee may be responsible to the convention committee. For example, the convention committee answers directly to the hosting service body. RCMs report back to the areas, and so our groups are informed and able to be responsible. Because there are so many layers, we need to think carefully about what must be communicated and how to get that information to and from our points of responsibility. Each has a part to play in the work at hand, and yet the work must go forward in a way that is timely and, yes, organized. We recognize that some issues really need to go back to the groups, but sometimes the groups will attend to an issue that a committee hadn't seen as important or had been decided long ago. Allowing everyone into the process means that we need to be able to explain how and why decisions were made without becoming impatient or intolerant of those who are asking. Even so, when an issue has been raised and decided many times already, it may not be prudent to revisit decisions if the circumstances and information haven't changed much. Concept 5 gives us tools to more effectively practice tradition. 9. Clear lines of accountability and decision-making draw clear lines of communication between our boards and committees and those we serve. Our groups always hold the reins on our service bodies, not the other way around. No single group is responsible for our service boards. Our service boards do not manage or oversee our groups. Groups, not service bodies, are autonomous. Direct responsibility is difficult. It's a practical principle that requires spiritual effort. The relationship between our groups and our service bodies changes over time and differs from one place to another. Our widespread growth and development is a testament to the value of our flexibility and reliance on the simple guidance offered by our traditions. Our commitments to avoid professionalization, organization, affiliation, and outside support keep us free to do what we do best regardless of changes in fashion or politics. Tradition 9 helps us practice anonymity by keeping us from creating structures that would make us unequal. We practice mentorship and train our trusted servants in a spirit of rotation and continuity. Whatever our lives or circumstances are like, in Narcotics Anonymous, we all have a voice in the process and an opportunity to serve. Our service helps others every day, and each of us who serves finds our own recovery enriched by the work. It drives us to learn, to grow, to practice principles, and to reach out in new directions. Tradition 9 reminds us that we are never doing this alone. Our service efforts are always guided and supported by our groups and by that greater conscience that guides us all. Epilogue. Direct responsibility is a critical concept in our lives and in service. It's not just that we are accountable for the work we do. We stay aware of what we are doing, why we are doing it, and who will benefit from our efforts. This clarity keeps us from being diverted or distracted by our egos, or by arguments over territory or control. Narcotics Anonymous belongs to all of us, and it is too easy to mistake our desires and opinions for those of the fellowship as a whole. Being directly responsible keeps us on track and in proportion. Tradition 9 reminds us where our service bodies fit within NA as a whole. Our service boards and committees are always ultimately responsible to those they serve. In our efforts to practice this tradition, each of us can learn to communicate more effectively and to practice principles including honesty, patience, and accountability. Tradition 9 helps us to keep our primary purpose constantly in mind as we serve. This concludes the Tradition 9 section of Guiding Principles in Service. Check the description below the video to read the questions that are for this section. You can answer them and then go over them with your sponsor or another NA member. Next up is Tradition 10 for members.